Next up, we're diving into the explosive world of space exploration. Literally, as SpaceX's Starship Flight 8 ends in another catastrophic failure, and I'm not talking about just any failure. I'm talking about an explosion so massive it was caught on camera by an astronaut in space, and today we're going to explore whether these repeated failures are a sign of incompetence or just a normal part of the innovative process.
Whoa, that's crazy. I mean, I've seen the videos, it looks like something out of a sci-fi movie, but seriously, how can a company like SpaceX, with all its resources and expertise, keep experiencing these kinds of failures? Shouldn't they be held accountable for the millions of dollars invested in this project?
Great question. Let's put things into perspective here. The development of any revolutionary technology is always going to be a bumpy ride, and SpaceX is no exception. Think about it. They're trying to create a reusable rocket that can take humans to the moon. It's a monumental task.
Right? But doesn't that mean they should be more careful with their testing process? Two failed flights in a row. That's not just a minor setback, that's a major red flag. What's going on here?
Well, let me tell you, the truth is, failure is an inherent part of the innovative process. Thomas Edison once said, "I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." And that's exactly what SpaceX is doing. They're trying different approaches, testing new technologies, and yes, sometimes that means things don't go as planned.
Okay, I get that, but what about the cost? We're talking millions of dollars here. Shouldn't there be some accountability for that kind of investment? It's not like they're just playing with monopoly money. These are real people's taxes and investments on the line.
That's a fair point, but let's look at it from a different perspective. The development of the Starship is not just about SpaceX, it's about advancing human knowledge and capabilities. Think about it. If SpaceX succeeds in creating a reusable rocket that can take humans to the moon, the implications are enormous. We're talking about a new era of space exploration, potentially even colonization.
I never thought of it that way. But what about the technical issues they're experiencing? It seems like they're having trouble with their propellant system, and now this high-energy event in the aft section, is that a sign of a deeper problem?
Great question. Yes, the technical challenges are definitely significant, but that's what makes this project so fascinating. SpaceX is pushing the boundaries of what's possible with rocket technology, and sometimes that means encountering unexpected problems. But as they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and I have no doubt that they'll figure it out.
Right. But what about the delay in their test program? They were supposed to do this in-space propellant transfer test by 2025. Is that still on track?
Well, obviously these setbacks are going to impact their timeline, but SpaceX has always been a company that sets ambitious goals and then works towards them. I'm sure they'll get back on track, and when they do, it's going to be huge. Can you imagine being able to send humans to the moon on a reusable rocket? It's a game changer.
Wow, that would be amazing. But what about the environmental impact of these failed launches? We're talking about debris raining down on Earth. Is that something we should be concerned about?
Great point. Yes, the environmental impact is definitely a concern, but SpaceX has assured us that there are no toxic materials present in the debris and no significant impacts expected to occur to marine species or water quality. But of course, that's something they'll need to continue monitoring.
Okay, got it. So, what's next for SpaceX? Are they going to try again, and if so, when?
Well, I'm sure they'll be back at it soon. They're already investigating the cause of the failure, and once they figure out what went wrong, they'll be ready to launch again. And when they do, we'll be right here, watching and waiting to see if they can finally make it happen.
I'm excited to see what happens next. This is like a real-life space drama unfolding before our eyes.
Next up, we're going to tackle the ambitious goal of establishing a human colony on Mars by 2050, a deadline set by none other than Elon Musk. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the reality of making humanity a multi-planetary species. We're calling this episode Mars or Bust: Can Elon Musk's Deadline Be Met?
Wow, that's a really exciting topic. Who doesn't want to see humans on Mars, right? But, isn't 2050 just around the corner? I'm having trouble wrapping my head around how they plan to achieve this in such a short time frame.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore today. The challenges are numerous, from developing reliable life support systems to creating a safe and stable habitat for humans on the Martian surface. not to mention the psychological effects of long-term space travel on the human mind and body.
Right. I never thought about that. I mean, we've seen it in movies, but actually doing it is a whole different story. So, what's the current state of SpaceX's Starship program? And do they have any tangible progress towards making this deadline?
Well, as we've seen recently, their latest test flight ended in an explosion just minutes after launch. However, it's worth noting that they were able to successfully return the first stage booster to the launch pad, which is a significant achievement. But yes, there are concerns that the 2050 deadline might be putting undue pressure on the engineers and technicians to rush through the development process.
That's a great point. I mean, rushing into something like this could lead to, catastrophic consequences. Have there been any instances where SpaceX has had to, how do I put this, cut corners or prioritize certain aspects of the project over others due to time constraints?
Actually, there have been reports of SpaceX pushing its employees to work extremely long hours, often with limited resources. And while it's not uncommon for tech companies to have a fast-paced environment, when you're dealing with space exploration, the margin for error is essentially zero. One mistake could be fatal.
Right, that makes sense. It's like, I don't know, trying to build a skyscraper in record time without ensuring the foundation is solid. You're just asking for disaster. So what about NASA's involvement in all this? They've contracted SpaceX to develop Starship for their Artemis program, right?
That's correct. NASA has a vested interest in seeing Starship succeed, as it's a crucial component of their plans to return astronauts to the moon and eventually send humans to Mars. But there are also concerns about the reliance on private companies like SpaceX to achieve these goals, given the risks and uncertainties involved.
I see what you mean. It's like we're putting all our eggs in one basket, and if that basket fails, well, it could set back the entire space program. Do you think there's a possibility that the deadline could be, pushed back or revised to give SpaceX more time to develop Starship safely and efficiently?
It's definitely possible. In fact, many experts believe that a more realistic timeline for establishing a human colony on Mars would be somewhere in the 2060s or even 2070s. But Elon Musk is known for his ambitious goals and his ability to push the boundaries of what's thought possible.
Right? I can see why he'd want to stick to his guns. But at what cost? I mean, is it really worth risking lives and billions of dollars in investment just to meet an arbitrary deadline? Maybe we should be focusing on making sure the technology is sound and the risks are mitigated before we start talking about sending humans to Mars.
That's a great point, and it's something that SpaceX and NASA will need to carefully consider as they move forward with the Starship program. Perhaps we'll see a more nuanced approach in the coming years, one that balances ambition with caution and prioritizes safety above all else.
I hope so. This is all really fascinating, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. But, can we talk about something else for a second? What's the deal with those smart glasses that can zoom in and out? Are they related to space exploration at all?
Laughs. Well, not directly, but they are an interesting example of how technology is advancing in various fields. Those smart glasses you're referring to use AI-powered lenses to adjust focus and zoom, which could potentially have applications in fields like astronomy or even space exploration.
Whoa, that's cool. I didn't know that. Okay. Sorry for the tangent. Let's get back to Mars.
Next up, we're discussing the delicate balance between innovation and safety in the private space industry, specifically with companies like SpaceX. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the exciting world of space exploration, but also the risks that come with it. We're going to talk about whether governments and regulatory bodies should step in to establish stricter safety standards for private space companies.
That's a really interesting question. So, you're saying that there's a risk of catastrophic failures and loss of life if we don't have stricter safety standards. Can you give me an example of what you mean by catastrophic failures?
Absolutely. Let's take a look at SpaceX's history. They've had their fair share of launch failures, including the Falcon 1 failures back in the early 2000s. For instance, their first flight in 2006 ended in failure due to a fuel leak in the first stage. And more recently, they've had issues with their Starship program, with all 3 test flights ending in failure.
Wow, that's crazy. I had no idea. So, you're saying that if we don't have stricter safety standards, we could see more of these kinds of failures, right? And what about the risk to human life? I mean, SpaceX is planning to send humans to Mars and the Moon, so, isn't that a huge concern?
Exactly. The risk to human life is a major concern. And it's not just about the astronauts themselves, but also about the people on the ground who could be affected by a launch failure. I mean, imagine if a rocket were to fail and crash into a populated area, it would be devastating. So yeah, stricter safety standards could potentially reduce that risk.
Okay, but wouldn't stricter safety standards stifle innovation? I mean, SpaceX is known for pushing the boundaries of what's possible in space exploration. If we start regulating them too heavily, won't that just slow them down and give other countries an advantage?
That's a great point. Innovation is crucial in the private space industry, and overregulation could definitely stifle that. But on the other hand, we have to weigh that against the risk of loss of life and catastrophic failures. I mean, take the example of the Falcon 9 rocket that disintegrated during the CRS-7 mission back in 2015. That was a major setback for SpaceX, but it also led to significant improvements in their safety procedures.
I'm right. So you're saying that there's a balance that needs to be struck between innovation and safety, and governments and regulatory bodies need to find that balance. But how do we do that? I mean, it's not like we can just, how do we even regulate something as complex as space exploration?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. One approach could be to establish clear guidelines and standards for safety protocols, while still allowing companies like SpaceX to innovate and push the boundaries of what's possible. It's not an easy task, but it's definitely doable. And we can look at examples from other industries like aviation or healthcare, where strict safety standards have been implemented without stifling innovation.
Okay. I think I'm starting to see what you mean. So it's not a question of either or, but rather, how do we find that sweet spot between safety and innovation? And what role should governments and regulatory bodies play in all of this?
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance and creating an environment where companies like SpaceX can thrive while still prioritizing safety. And I think that's a conversation that needs to happen now before we start seeing more and more private space companies pushing the boundaries of what's possible. We need to make sure that we're not sacrificing safety on the altar of innovation.
Right. Got it. So let's, explore this idea further. What do you think are some potential consequences if we don't establish stricter safety standards? I mean, worst case scenario, what could happen?
Well, worst case scenario, we could see a major launch failure that results in loss of life or significant damage to property. And that would not only be devastating for the people directly affected, but also for the entire space industry as a whole. It could lead to a loss of public trust and confidence in private space companies, which could ultimately stifle innovation and progress.
Okay, that's a pretty dire scenario. But what about, the role of insurance companies in all of this? Could they play a part in regulating safety standards?
Great point. Insurance companies could definitely play a role in incentivizing private space companies to prioritize safety. I mean, if insurance premiums are higher for companies that don't meet certain safety standards, that could be a powerful motivator for them to invest in safety protocols.
Right? And what about, international cooperation? Could we see some kind of global framework for regulating private space companies?
Absolutely. International cooperation is crucial in this area. We need to have a unified set of standards and guidelines that apply across the board, regardless of where a company is based or operating. That way, we can ensure that safety standards are consistent and enforced globally.
Okay, got it. So let's, summarize what we've discussed so far. We need to find a balance between innovation and safety. Governments and regulatory bodies need to play a role in establishing safety standards, and insurance companies and international cooperation could also be part of the solution. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And I think this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation about the future of private space exploration and how we ensure that it's safe and responsible.